Everybody, and thank you for joining this event sponsored by the Society of Professional Journalists New England chapter. I'm Mike Fink, and I'm joined here tonight by Tyler Kepner. Tyler Kepner is a national baseball columnist for the New York Times. He's been covering baseball for more than 25 years, and he is an author of two best-selling books, including K, A History of Baseball in 10 Pitches. He's here to talk to us tonight about this book, The Grandest Stage, A History of Baseball, A History of the World Series. Tyler, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome, Mike. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to talk to you about this. So you already wrote one history book on baseball, K History. What made you want to write this book about the World Series and its history?
Well, I just love the event. I mean, I've been really captured, enraptured, whatever you want to say, by the World Series ever since the first one I saw in '82 when I was 7, and then the first one I attended the next year when I was 8. That really hooked me in, and you know, I've gotten to cover so many of them now that I thought, you know, with the ability to talk to the people involved and the contacts I have, that I could really dive deep into you know, the history of it for sure, but also, you know, mainly doing it in a way that's not like a sort of a dry chronology or a research book. You know, try to do something with more, you know, 7 sort of universal themes and topics that apply to all series, so I could kind of sprinkle in anecdotes and stories from throughout the you know, 119 years now. So
Yeah, I'm a huge, like, the anecdotes, we'll get to that in a second. I'm a huge fan of like the way you integrate a lot of the anecdotes in, but I want to first ask, like, you mentioned your first World Series, and like I think everyone remembers their first World Series experience, but like, how would you say the game has evolved since the first World Series ever, like since 1903? How has it changed? How is the World Series event, if you will, becoming a spectacle, or becoming even like, how has it changed since then, if you will?
yeah, well, I mean, so much of the game has changed, right? I mean, you know, home runs were relatively rare back then, and there was no television, obviously. So the whole transmission of it was completely different. There were player managers quite often, so that whole aspect was different. It's cool that it's still, you know, that the Pirates and the Red Sox were the first teams to play in it, and they're still around. So there's that continuity of it. And if you go to Northeastern University, you can find the statue of Cy Young from where he threw the first pitch in the World Series, and I think that's kind of cool. That's something that we mark, and that anyone can go see. So yeah, I mean, so much about baseball and everything has changed, but the idea that you know, even though the first one was best of 9, the idea that you have a best of 7 series to decide the champion between the National League and the American League, you know, that fundamental underpinning is still there. The playoff route to get there is all different, but the series between the AL champ and the NL champ, you know, still holds to this day.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned the how something stayed, like the statue, and how some things stayed the same. I thought about how Fenway Park hosted the 1912 World Series, and it's still around, same ballpark, more or less. And it's like, it's kind of, do you think that's special just about baseball in general, that sometimes the more things change, the more they stay the same, that little balance?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, to still have Fenway Park and Wrigley Field, and the history that they have there. I mean, when you talk about, you know, the Christy Mathewson and Tris Speaker playing in the 1912 World Series, or Babe Ruth and, you know, and Lou Gehrig playing in the 32 World Series at Wrigley. I mean, those two places are still in use today, and even Yankee Stadium, and, you know, the new one's right across the street, and they still play ball and you know, on the fields over there. So that kind of hallowed ground is still used for baseball, and so many things that happen there. So it's really cool, though, just for the continuity of the game and the tradition, that you know, that you can go to these places and point out the things that happened here over 100 years ago.
Yeah, when I read this book, which one of the things that I really liked was the anecdotes like from the redemption story of Bill Buckner, which kind of has a happy, interesting ending to it, which I like to, I think you probably can dive into. And you have the unassisted triple play in the 1920 World Series by Bill, I'm going to pronounce his name wrong, Wamgas or Wamgan.
Yeah, everybody just called him Wambi, so that's
yeah.
it's
Like, yeah, you saw him. There's a Saber page of all the nicknames that he was given. It was like, so one of the things I'm wondering with all these stories, you make it sound like you were there for these stories. Like, how did you get these anecdotes, and how did you discover them to begin with? Like, some of them you probably came across when you were looking for, like, okay, I want to look into this World Series. So how do you kind of come across some of these interesting anecdotes when you were just kept writing it?
Yeah, well, I actually found the history of the World Series to be fairly accessible. Something I could get my hands around. There's goes back to 1903, and there's been every year except for 2 years, 04 and 94. But I just felt that there was sort of a flow to them. Like certain teams are good for a while, and other teams take over. So there's kind of it's all connected. And so I had that kind of foundation. And then when you go to the Hall of Fame, their library staff is so incredibly helpful, and there's a lot of great stuff that you can look up there. Newspapers.com is amazing. Like, you have contemporary accounts from the actual newspapers, which were the primary source of reporting on the World Series for so many years. And I have a big library of my own here that I can go through, and just purchasing a lot of used books and stuff, and then interviewing people themselves. So I didn't find it really too daunting a task, really, to kind of go through these 118, well, now 119, well, no, 118, I guess now, events, just because a lot of times one connects to the other, and it's a pretty much unbroken chain all the way back.
Yeah, and I guess having a good memory, just being like, oh, I can remember everyone who batted in every World Series, since then it also probably helps, right?
Yeah, that helps a lot. Like, I don't know why exactly, but I do have a memory for stuff like that. Like, and where that helps, I mean, it helps in a lot of ways, but it helps in research because you kind of know where to look for things, and it really helps in interview settings. Sometimes even when you're not looking for something, like if I'm at a game, I might see somebody and just know that he pitched in a big spot in the 91 World Series, and then just go grab him. Or he played with this person who did this. I don't know, I can kind of make those connections. So that does help a lot.
Yeah. It was interesting you mentioned how some of the anecdotes were easy to come by. I'm wondering, is some of the stories in one chapter or game, if you will, is what you might not know. And I think is like some of the stories. So everyone knows about Babe Ruth's called shot, but not many know the story of the pitcher and his son, Charlie, and the story that followed with a certain baseball. But like, what I'm curious is, how do you kind of come across those types of stories, or were you looking for can you tell us about how you're able to confirm a story like that, like the pitcher and his son, like, and that whole story? How are you able to kind of come across that and confirm that, really?
Yeah, a lot of it's just, for that chapter, I was really trying to get away from just retelling the same sort of warmed over stories. Carlton Fisk hitting the home run, or Kirk Gibson hitting the home run, or all these things that people who are inclined to buy that book probably know pretty well. So I wanted to do kind of the what you might not know about those big moments, right? Like the instead of focusing on the ins and outs, the particulars of the Black Sox scandal, that's been written and in so much more depth than I was going to get into. So I looked at the Reds, like the team that beat them, and discovered how good that team really was, and it doesn't really get its credit historically. So yeah, you go in there thinking, like, what are some of the biggest topics or the biggest events in the World Series and moments, and then you study those and look at the things around them and what interested me about those events besides just the main moment. And then you just go research them. So, you know, there's a lot out there about Charlie Root and his story, and, you know, because a lot of these guys live a long time, and they do a lot of interviews about these topics with various people, and the Hall of Fame, you know, has so many of them clipped and saved in these vast files they have up there. So that really comes in handy.
Yeah, some of the players that lived a long time. You mentioned that, and I thought of like someone you got to interview a few times, Johnny Pesky, who lived long. I mean, like, this is a little off topic, but like when you countered some of those guys like Johnny Pesky, whose moment was that he held on to the ball on a as the cutoff man, like with some of those players, how are you able to approach them about like a moment that they, let's say, were on the wrong side of, or like that they choked away a moment, or like Bill Buckner is a good example also, where, I mean, interviewing him, like, were they pushing back, or were they able to open about it, or how is that part? Because that's a chapter also, not to spoil it, but how are you able to kind of deal with that or approach that?
Yeah, well, you know, that could be tough. You know, unfortunately, you know, Buckner and Pesky had both died before I started researching the book, so I had to rely on you know, the many interviews that they did over the years with others, and I cite those writers who did those. And you know, after a while, most guys, I think, know that questions are coming, and they know how to answer them. I tried to look for some of the guys who are maybe lesser known for let's say failing in the big moments. You know, I reached out to Jim Poole, you know, who gave up the only run in you know, a home run to Dave Justice to lose the World Series in 1995, and he was great talking about it, talking about how that was the last thing his friend told him that afternoon at the Georgia Tech football game he went to. His buddy said, "Hey, whatever you do, don't let Justice beat you tonight." And he went in and faced Dave Justice, and he hit the home run, and the Braves won 1-0, and they won the championship. So, yeah, but he talked about just the thrill of competing and having no regrets because he did the best he could. And, you know, not every pitch is going to be perfect, and that guy's going to try to get a hit too. And so it happened, but he didn't have any regrets about how he handled it. And it was similar to Charlie Lebrand, you know, again, staying with that Braves era. You know, Lebrand, I remember watching so many times in the World Series in '85 and 91 and 92, and you know, thinking what a stalwart this guy is, and just sort of what hard luck he would have, particularly in '85. He pitched brilliantly, but you know, lost the lead in the ninth inning in Game 2, and then stood to be the losing pitcher in a 1-0, what was a 1-0 game in Game 6, and you know, so he kind of had that sort of reputation, I guess, as a tough luck guy, and then he's on the mound in relief for the Puckett home run in '91, and then the Dave Winfield go-ahead double in '92. It's like same situation just about, and it happens again. But Charlie was great. I mean, you know, he was really good talking about the particulars of those situations. And the toughest one for me actually was Ron Washington, because I love Wash, and I see everyone in baseball loves Wash, and I didn't want to you know, force him to revisit the, you know, the most agonizing moment of his managing career, you know, coming within one strike and maybe not having the outfielders in the right position and stuff. And but you know, I mean, Wash, I've known him for a while. I just kind of, like everybody in baseball, I just kind of went up to him and told him, "Hey, this is what I'm doing, and you know, I'd love to talk to you about it. I'm sure you've probably talked about it a lot before, but if I'm going to write about it, I wanted to go right to the source." And you know, he understood that. He's been through this a long time, and he was great. I just went down one day when, you know, before a game at City Field, and just sat on the bench with him, and you know, just dissected that World Series for a long time. And the nice thing for him was that he did end up getting the ring that year, you know, as a third base coach for the Braves.
Yeah, it seems like you mentioned Wash, and I was thinking, like, when you're in baseball long enough, you have the chance to redeem yourself, like Dusty Baker just recently. I guess shifting gears a bit, because we're on this is everyone's we're in a Boston, New England area chapter. We're curious. The 1904 World Series, a Giants team refused to play. A team in New York, the Giants, refused to play the Boston Americans, who were defending champions. Do you think they were scared to lose?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it had to do with I mean, maybe there was some of that, but it was mainly just John McGraw. John McGraw was, you know, larger than life figure, you know, almost bigger than the game sort of type guy. And he had played for the American League president, or he was familiar with the American League president from their days in Baltimore, where the old Baltimore Orioles, the National League. The guy's name was Ban Johnson, and so he had a real rivalry with Ban Johnson and didn't want to give him the satisfaction of you know, of playing against the inferior American League in 1904. So I think it was, a lot of it was just sort of personal spite between you know, McGraw and Johnson that went back a lot of years. But you know, when the Giants won in 1905, the players, you know, really wanted to play because they get more money for playing the World Series rather than just you know, nursing the manager's grudge. So you know, it picked up then and kept on going for 90 more years until the strike.
Yeah, the 1905 World Series certainly was able to prove. I guess it was John McGraw proving his point a bit, because Boston was the defending World Series champion in from 1904. So
yeah.
It felt like that was his proving it, right, if you will.
Yeah, you know, it's funny how history repeats itself, though. You talk about the Red Sox, and I mean, you think they won in 03, just like they won in 2004, and then they won a bunch up until the year 18. When they won in 1918, they won in 2018. They trade or get rid of a generational player, Babe Ruth, Mookie Betts. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if it's going to be 86 years, so let's hope not. But you know, it is very interesting how in the first 2 decades of both centuries they won 4 or 5 championships, then got rid of a great player, and I don't know. It's a dangerous precedent to keep going.
Nah. Oh, you got a comment, please. From
He's not another curse. No, believe me, I got kids in college in Boston. They love the Red Sox. I got a lot of extended family who loves the Red Sox. So
I think people are more scared.
I work for a New York paper, but I have no grudge against the Red Sox. In fact, they were my favorite American League team growing up, actually.
Yeah. It's funny. I think we're more scared of a Dodgers dynasty. If they win 27 World Series and 16 in 26 years, I think we're just gonna be like, oh, the Dodgers win every year. That's gonna be.
I think the playoff system probably takes care of that. You know, I mean, if they had all these expanded playoffs in the 50s and 20s and 30, you know, I don't know how many of those titles the Yankees would have won.
Yeah, and this is a little off topic. Do you think that the Yankees would? Because a lot of people say, like, these teams were good. They had 3-peats or they had whatever. Do you think they'd be good with free agency and with the draft and with all these? Would they win those 16 and 26 years, which I think from 1936 to 1962, they won 16 in 26 years. And it's like, would they have that success if there was all these things in place, luxury tax, draft, the salary, free agency? Do you think they would just be one of a random team, like good but not great? Or you think
I mean, I think they'd have their advantages. You know, they've always had the financial advantage, and they were very smart back then. But they really got away with it for a while by being late to integration. You know, it didn't cost. That's how great they were. It didn't really cost them. You know, by lagging as long as they did. You know, they got Elson Howard, and then they won 5 more, you know, American League championships. So think about how much better they would have been if they had been quicker to that. But they were stacked, but certainly the expanded playoffs would have dulled their dynasty, and the draft, as you say, and expansion teams, and just, you know, there are a lot more hurdles now to winning that often, which is why really the Jeter years, the Joe Torre years, just get bigger and more impressive the further away you get from them, because to win 4 championships in 5 years and to very nearly win a fifth in 2001. To get through all those playoffs, it's amazing. I mean, really what it was the Yankees using their advantages, the Yankees being really smart, and a lot of other teams not. They had, just other teams that were not nearly as well run as the Yankees in those years, and they kept playing like they had Texas's number. They'd get past Texas or Seattle, or they really didn't have a team that knew how to play them until the Angels came around in 02 and 05 and the Marlins. So they, things started to normalize in the 2000s when I was covering them. But yeah, to me, that Ed the Cashman, that dynasty they had back then is just remarkable because no one's repeated since then.
Yeah, no one's. I was thinking nobody's repeated since 2098 through 2000 as the last back-to-back champion. And right. I mean, it also helped the Yankees back then when George Steinbrenner was suspended for a bit, and they were able to build a winning core of young players.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I want to ask, we've kind of glanced over through how you researched the book, but what were the challenges you had what were some of the challenges you came across with this book, and more what were some of your difficulties, if you will?
Yeah, I think it was in coming up with a format that allowed me to tell stories and do the interviews that I like to do, and without going over too much old ground. And I think so part of what I struggle with sometimes is that it's almost like I don't know how to say, like a when a player tries to coach sometimes, and he just assumes that everybody knows what he knows. And so a lot of times I feel like oh man, is everybody going to know this already? Is this story going to be warmed over? And turns out a lot of people don't. So things that I might have known just off the top of my head have been really new to a lot of readers, and that's been really fun to be able to share some of the stuff that I knew and maybe took for granted that other people knew, that it would still be enlightening and interesting to people. So once I kind of got past that, I was able to say, all right, these are the stories that I'm not going to eliminate, because I feel like I touch on every major thing that happened. But I don't need to, once I freed myself up, I don't need to go over the specifics of like the Black Sox, who took the money and when and why, or Don Larson, all the specifics of the perfect game, or things like that. And I can really focus on the other topics and know that they weren't as widely known as maybe I thought. I don't know, that helped. And once I got the format down, it was just a matter of getting the interviews and rolling with it when I didn't get someone. But most people were great.
Yeah. You mentioned, I was thinking, you're, as a baseball expert, you probably are thinking oh, everybody knows about Harry the Cat and Harry the Hat, so I shouldn't include that. But
right. The Dr. Seuss team, right? The Harry the Cat and Harry the Hat beat the Red Sox in '46. Right.
It's also I love coming across that that and the same team that had Dizzy and Daffy Dean. It's that's great. One is interesting because I'm thinking you're in baseball expert, all these stuff, but were you thinking was that an obstacle in itself, thinking what my audience is going to be, how much do they know, and how much whether I should what was that was that basically the obstacle, if you will, saying oh, I'm sure baseball fans are going to pick this up, but how much do baseball fans know that I should include certain stories, or I should really talk in detail about that, if you will? Is that really
yeah, I think that's when I kind of a little bit of it's a guessing game, and then you sort of just have to say, well, if they do know it already, I'll just try to tell it better. I'll tell it in my voice, and in following my instincts in the way to tell that story, and usually that that works out okay. So that was that was something I was able to I think use my advantage. Just doing one book already kind of gave me a little more, I think, confidence that that the way I tell these stories is a way that that people like. I really try hard not to get too bogged down in like too many of the details, because people read right over it and then they might give up. Like I like there's so much potential for like play by play, right? Like, this many outs, this is where the runners are, this is what the score is, this is what the inning is. By the time you say, give all the situational stuff, you kind of lose some readers. So I needed to make sure that the story, the words flowed, and that I didn't, I gave enough details to clue the reader into what was happening, but not bog them down to where it's like, wait, what inning are we in now? The top, how many, where are the runners? You know what I mean? Like, and I even got one of those runs. Somebody emailed me and said, like, oh, you had Willie Mays in the bottom of the ninth when it was really the top of the ninth because the game was on the road. I'm like, yeah, I wrote bottom of the ninth to the top. Sometimes, but for the most part, all the details, except for a couple here and there. The Orioles pitcher who picked up the bunt and threw it when Jerry Martin punted in the '69 series. I had this Dick Hall, and it was really I forget exactly who, Pete Rickard or something like that. So I don't know. So a couple little things I'll get in the next edition, I guess.
Part two, or read. I'm sure you've been asked that. Actually, it's not a little off topic. A lot of people probably said like, "Oh, do you have to redo the book because of Christian Javier, because of Dusty Baker?" Have you gotten that question a lot, or people being like, "Oh, now that you wrote this, you have to redo it because like the World Series just happened"?
Yeah, more in a joking way. I think that was one of the things I envisioned was it was never an option, never a desire to do a chronology. But every time I see a chronology of anything, let's say history of the Super Bowl, the first thing I'm going to do is look and say what's the last one when was the publishing year and what's the last one they have. And if it only goes up to Super Bowl 50 or whatever, then I know that the Eagles Super Bowl is not in there. When we beat the Patriots, that's my favorite team. So so like, the Patriots won the very next year. So I don't want to hear anything from Patriots fans. They stopped playing. We're allowed to have our one. But so like that's why I wanted to write a book that was, like I said, somewhat timeless, to where you're not just looking and saying, oh, there's nothing in here about 2022. Sure, there's not anything about 2022, because the book was published before the series happened, but there are still themes that apply all the way through. And if there is another edition then or an update or whatever in the next version, then paperback, whatever, then great. I mean, it would happen to be a Phillies World Series, and there's a lot of Phillies stuff in there because that's where I'm from, and so I get into specifically 80 and 83 and 93 quite a bit in there. So this one was really fun for me because Phillies lost, but Houston was a better team, and there was some fun, dramatic stuff that happened, historic stuff, the no-hitter, Bryce Harper hitting a home run on the first pitch he sees in Philadelphia, and my son got to go to the games, and that was really exciting for me because the only other one he went to, he was 6, and he doesn't remember much about that from the Tampa Bay World Series. So this was a personal one that was fun for me too.
Yeah, I mean, there's also you talk about the Phillies one, and it was like it almost felt full circle that a no-hitter was thrown against the Phillies. The last time a no-hitter was thrown was by a Philly in the postseason, and Dusty Baker was on the other side. It felt like very full circle on that.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things, like what I like on the note of like the anecdotes, is that there's some stories when it comes to baseball in general, and the World Series is no exception, is this legend versus fact feel, where like some sort of like, did he really do that, or did that really happen? And I guess one of the questions is, how do you separate legend from fact, or legendary stories from like what really happened? And sometimes how do you like include some of that like legendary moment into it, if you will?
Yeah, there's the biggest example of that is, very well, the short answer is just research it as much as you can and find all the evidence and come to a conclusion, in a situation where everybody's dead or where there's not conclusive video evidence or something. Certain things are easy, you just have to double check them, like Ron Washington was telling me how David Freese was hitting all these foul balls to the right side, and so that's why he positioned the outfielders the way he was, and it really wasn't that way. I mean, maybe if you go through the whole series or something, but like that night, it really wasn't quite how he remembered it, or that particular at bat didn't quite go how he thought. So that stuff's easy to check. It's the stuff like the called shot, like, where there's dozens of reporters there, and they have, some of them mention it and some of them don't. Some of them are definitive about it and some of them are not. It quickly becomes a great story for Babe Ruth, for his own purposes, to perpetuate, because it serves the myth. And so Gehrig was playing along and saying exactly what the Babe did, and then a few years later Gehrig's telling another story to someone else. So it's hard to say. I mean, like with the called shot thing, I really don't think he literally pointed to the center field stand and said, "I'm going to hit right there," because, like I wrote, if he did, Charlie Root, any self-respecting pitcher ever, especially in the 30s, was going to drill the guy. Like, you can't show up a pitcher like that. You just can't. But what he was doing, I think, was telling the bench, "Hey, I got one more left. It only takes one." That whole thing. Like, it's just. But even if at minimum he's telling the Cubs, like, "Hey, I still got one left. You watch. Just I'm going to shut you up," because they were yelling some real rough stuff at him. Even if he's still announcing his intentions to do something, he's not, I don't think, showing up the pitcher by saying, "There's where I would," but he's telling them, "Just you watch, I got something left in me." So it was still an amazing moment for a showman, to silence the bench the way he did in a hostile environment. It was still an amazing moment. But the legend of the called shot, I think it's just that. I think it's a legend that Ruth had every reason to perpetuate.
Yeah, and I like how you mentioned in the book, in a way, like, if you were in Charlie Root's shoes, what would you do if somebody called the shot? Like, in the sense, like, how we can really say that this is a legend or not. And case in point, later on, Charlie Root's son faced the same situation and had dealt with it on his own. So,
threw that wiffle ball right at her head. Right.
Yeah, that's basically the story. It's one of my favorite moments in the book, actually. Yeah. I guess one question in general is, if you could time travel to any World Series, you can mention a few for this, but some that you've been alive for, you could time travel and witness one World Series, or there are a few that you stick out that you'd say, like, I wish I could relive these World Series. Which ones, like, say, if you could pick three, like, which three would you pick?
Yeah, that's a great question, because you get into the whole thing of, do I want to go see the ones that were not televised, so that we have so I can put actual pictures, moving pictures to those moments, right? And then you have the ones that have been televised, and you're like, God, I wish I was at that game. That would have been so freaking exciting. So from the televised era, I would have loved to have been there in '91, because that's the question there. That's my favorite World Series to watch. That was so exciting, so riveting. All the extra inning games, the walk-offs, extra innings in 6 and 7. Kirby Puckett walks off with a homer. Jack Morris pitches a 10-inning shutout. I mean, the Braves were this new team that you knew was going to be there for a while. Worst to first, both of them. The Metrodome going crazy. Atlanta going crazy with the chopping and everything. I would have loved to go to the '91 World Series. And '75, obviously. Game 6 is just so epic. Even though obviously Cincinnati won the series, it was just such an amazing game, legendary game. And and on the other side for the Red Sox, '86, Game 6. The desolation for the Mets of being not. It's a little different than the Rangers one, because the Rangers Cardinals, like, there was stuff happening. There were guys on the bases. There was action. Things were in motion there, even though they got down to the last strike twice. But there was bases empty, 2 outs, down by 2. There was no hope like the Mets could come back. And then we all know what happened. So that would have been exciting to see. But you asked about where I'd want to go, and I think I'd love to have seen 1912, just because by all accounts that was an insanely exciting World Series. A comeback against Christy Mathewson with an error and a great play and another drop ball, all kinds of weird stuff happening, a walk, which Mathewson should never have done. So the chance to really sit at first year Fenway Park and see Mathewson and Speaker and a comeback in the bottom of the ninth in game 8. I mean, I think I'd have to go there. I'd love to see the first one. I've been to the site in Boston, and I got to get out of Boston at some point, on this journey. So I think, to see, even though it was on TV, some of those moments in the 50s, to see Larson's perfect game, to see game 7 of the Pirates Yankees series, just to see a baseball game now where nobody strikes out. That would, a 10-9 game with no strikeouts. Game 7 ended on a walk-off homer. That'd be great too. And of course, you'd have to go back and see if he really did call a shot. I'd like to see that too. So I think I gave you five black and white ones and 3 color ones. So that's a lot more than I probably get to do if I'm getting to this time.
Well, I mean, there was a question in the comment, and if anyone else has questions, they should certainly ask. You could feel free to ask them. It's interesting because at the end of the book, you write your list of World Series, your favorite ones or the greatest ones of all time, and you of course included the 91 one as one of the best. Where do you think the Cubs Cleveland one, that 2016 World Series, which for me, when I've been following baseball for as long as you have, that was one of the greatest ones I watched. And I was wondering, where you think that stands in history, especially since it ended the way it did. Mm-hmm. And in game 7, 2 teams that you knew a streak was going to be snapped. You knew Terry Francona was going to lead a team out of a curse again, or Theo Epstein was going to lead a team out of a curse again. And it was, where do you think that one kind of stands in history? Because for my money's worth, that's one of the ones that I'll always remember. So where do you think it kind of stands?
I think if you're going for significance, and that is part of the equation for me. If you're going for significance, that's way up there. But for actual great series, I covered that. I've written a ton about it since then. For me, there were only three really good games. There were more not so great games than great games. Game 5 was great. Game 7 was awesome. Game 3 was really good. But the first 2 games were not that great. The 4th game was not great. The 6th game was terrible. I think what was cool about it, obviously, like you said, was the historical context for either side, that you knew that one of the two, you had the 2 teams that had waited the longest playing against each other. That was awesome. What a great matchup. And you had the what I like about various World Series, and I didn't really get into this, as its standalone thing, but is the way the feeling sort of changes throughout the series, right? In that particular instance, you had, Cleveland wins the first game, so they're pumped up. And the Cubs come back and they tie it up. So it's 1-1 going to Chicago. And then Francona is real aggressive with his bullpen in game 3. They take a 2-1 lead, and then Kluber comes back. And so now the Indians are up 3-1. They can clinch it. But it's a good pitching matchup for the Cubs. It's Lester versus Bauer, and they've got Chapman lined up to pitch, almost 3 innings, which he does. And that was a really tight game where the Indians took the lead, and then the Cubs came back and they had some great pitching. So the Cubs okay, well, we got to come down from 3-1. We're going to have to go to Cleveland to do it. But now we've got some momentum. Now we're feeling good about ourselves. They go to Cleveland, blow them out in game 6. And now it's oh man, now you got Kluber coming back, but he's short. So all these, the point is all these different emotions are going into it up and down throughout the series. Then you get game 7, which was good, but not great until Rajai Davis hits that home run and ties the game. And that is what made that game great, because that was something that you didn't expect at all. That was a moment when the place went nuts. The Indians never took the lead in that game, but they did tie it. they had a chance to win it. Any one of three guys can hit a home run there, and it's a Mazeroski moment. Santana and Kipnis and Lindor. Chapman, to his credit, I mean, he's a complicated guy, but to his credit as a competitor, he gave up the lead in the 8th inning and came back and worked a 1-2-3 ninth when any home run would have lost the World Series without his best stuff. So that was big. That was big pitching. And then the rain delay and the comeback, and Mike Montgomery coming in to get the last out of all people. And I've talked to Mike many times and had sat to have dinner with him. I know Mike really well, and just for Mike Montgomery to be the guy to come in and just flip a couple curveballs and have Francona do everything right and yet still be left with nobody on the bench, for the ultimate moment where a home run wins it or an out loses it, to have to go with Michael Martinez. It was checkmate right there. So yeah, I mean, now I'm talking about it, maybe it should have been top 10 just based on that game alone, but I just think there were too many bad games in that series to make it top 10, to be honest. Too many dog games, really, if you sat there and watched it.
I guess, would you say then it parallels the 1960 World Series, like great Game 7, iconic moment in Game 7, but a lot of duds around because the 60 World Series also had, if I'm not mistaken, a lot of those blowout games, but yeah, Game 7.
I did have that in the list. Yeah, and maybe that's a inconsistency there. I think what made 60 so interesting though was that nature of the games, right? Like you had the Yankees just blowing them out 3 games, and then the Pirates winning 3 close games and then winning a 10-9 thriller at the end, where they finally were able to outscore this offensive juggernaut. But the idea that one team could be outscored, I think it was 55-27, and still win the World Series, was just so bizarre. And doing it at home with a walk-off home run in Game 7, the only time that's ever happened, that added something to it. Obviously, it being Casey Stengel's last game with the Yankees, it's just. And also, I don't know. I mean, there is some element of how much it means when when a team knocks off the Yankees. That's why there's several series on that list, that involve the Yankees losing, because it's such a big deal. I mean, like when the Red Sox won it in 2004, it was an even greater story. I mean, if they had beaten like Oakland in the LCS and then played the Phillies in the World Series and won in 5 games, I mean, it would have been awesome for you guys, but it wouldn't have been the same as coming back from down 0-3 to beat the hated Yankees. That added something to it. When Arizona won their first series, the fact that it was against the Yankees and Rivera, that mattered. The Angels in their series, when they just wiped out the Yankees in the first round, that added to it too. So having the Yankees as the natural sort of villain, having the Pirates be a Dragon Slayer, I think that elevates the World Series a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking that definitely when the Yankees were coming in as a juggernaut in that 1960 World Series, we got one of the comment questions was about the World Series, this event, the World Series existed before the Super Bowl, before the NBA Finals, the Stanley Cup Finals. So I guess, like, in terms of its event, like, where do you think it stands compared to the Super Bowl and compared to the other final series? That, like, where do you think it stands in that mix of the big 4 sports, if you will, or other big events?
Yeah, well, there's no doubt. I mean, the Super Bowl is king, right? I mean, just it's a national event. It has a lot going for it in terms of it being one game for everything. The fact that they started at 6 o'clock, 6:30 in the East on a Sunday, it's the perfect timing. It's one of the only things that East Coast fans actually get to watch at the best possible time. Because it's over before you go to bed. You don't have to worry about staying up late, and so the Super Bowl has a lot going for it. And I love the Super Bowl. Who doesn't? But It's a fundamentally different thing, the World Series. It's a week or more of thinking about it, and different emotions and different stories and themes throughout. It's 25 hours versus 3 hours. It's if it goes 7. It, it's it's just a different product, and it really reflects what baseball is. Baseball's an everyday companion. It's something that you get more data points every day to chew on and to analyze. Football, you just get it once a week, and then you just sort of think about it all week, and you just wait, and you don't think about it. You can put it out of your mind for a little while. Oh, well, we're coming around to game time again. Baseball, it's always with you. So it's just a fundamentally different event. But in terms of, importance in American life, everything has dwindled except the Super Bowl. The events that were kind of equal to baseball, but to the World Series back then, when you think about like the Kentucky Derby, or the Rose Bowl, or the a prize fight or something, a heavyweight fight, the Masters, like a lot of these things are like are not as big a deal as they used to be. The ratings, we know, are never great, but they're good enough for baseball, because all Fox wants is to win the week, to win the ratings those nights, and they always do. I mean, they get millions and millions of people watch it. It's not as many millions as it used to be, and it's not as many millions as the Super Bowl. So yeah, the ratings always look bad in comparison to what they used to be, but that's actually true for everything except NFL football. For whatever reason, everybody still loves to watch the NFL, and it's great. I do too, but it's once a week. It's not every day. So
yeah.
I think when people say football is the most popular sport in America, I don't think that's actually true, because they might answer that on a survey or something. But when you look at how many hours people spend consuming baseball versus how many hours people spend consuming football, because it's a once a week thing, it's no comparison. Way more people spend money to go to baseball games, football games, spend time watching baseball than football. Just different product.
And it's kind of interesting because like there's always this argument like, oh, baseball's losing popularity. They need to change certain things about the sport, whether it's rules or whether you fill in the blank changing. But like it almost seems like baseball has this popularity because of this, that it has this like history where it's like people always find it this timeless game, that it is literally a timeless game, and it's like it has its unique popularity, if you will. Like I feel like that it's kind of interesting. Do you feel like MLB in a way is trying to balance, like we need to change but we want to stay the same? I asked a little bit about this, but just in general, their rules like speeding up the game.
Yeah, I think what they're doing now is really it's very tricky for them. What they're trying to do is go back to the future. Like they're trying to go to the future by trying to legislate in, or trying to not legislate exactly, but trying to engineer things into the game that make it a better product. And by that I mean more action, fewer strikeouts, that kind of thing, more stolen bases, a quicker pace. And that's okay. I mean, that's Theo Epstein is from my generation. He's born in 73. I'm born in 75, and Theo's doing a lot of this stuff for MLB, and he's saying they're trying to get back to the product that we grew up with, and that is not the shifting all the time, the crazy shifting that they do, and that is not the 3 true outcome game, and all that. So the game does evolve, but I think they're trying to, and I think it's going to be okay. I think they're putting in these things to try to normalize what makes baseball great, and kind of dull the edges of what the game is becoming. And I'm not saying that it's bad, because I still love it. I still absolutely love baseball in its current form. I really do. But I think it could be better. And if you can get it so there's someone who's stealing more bases than 40, that we can name. I mean, John Birdie, good for him, that he's leading the league in stolen bases. But I thought it was a little bit better game when like Ricky Anderson and Tim Raines and guys like that were, were running wild on the bases. So I'd love to see more of that. And they're trying. They are trying, but it's really tricky. The one thing though, I'll say at the end of this answer, is that every single generation throughout baseball history has been faster paced than the generation before. And because of that, there's always articles, there's always talk that baseball's too slow for this fast-paced generation. They've been saying that since the 1800s. They've always worried about baseball's slow pace in this fast-moving society. It's always happened. So I don't know. Baseball's still going strong.
Yeah, we got a question about role models that when you're growing up, becoming a journalist, like who did you look up to and whose work currently do you admire? Interesting on the admiring work these days. I was talking to beforehand on the chat about some of the baseball writers. This is like holy trinity almost of like, you think of like Tim Kirchin, Jason Stark, like of these writers who's like acknowledge, like whose work do you admire, like nowadays, like current writers and people in the past that growing up like you might have also admired?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's it's a tribute to them. I mean, I grew up outside Philadelphia. We got the Philadelphia Inquirer every day, and the national baseball writer was Jason Stark. And how lucky was I? Because he did and does have a way of making baseball fun and interesting. And I mean, I could talk all night about how influential Jason's been on me as a writer, as a kid before I even met him, as a teenager who was getting into the business very young, because I had my own baseball magazine. I was around the Vet in Philadelphia when I was at 15, 16, 17 doing interviews. So when I was starting my career back then, and then now, getting to cover World Series with him and getting to be his friend and confidant. It's been one of the most special relationships in my life. So Jason is still the best baseball writer. He's the best baseball writer ever lived. So he still is. So he's the one. But there's more than just Jason. And I mean, Sports Illustrated, I read that all the time growing up. I read as many books as I could. Peter Gammon's great friend and inspiration, great writer beyond just being a great reporter. Kirkjian, like you said, and so many people like him, like Tim and Peter and Jason have always been in my corner. Paul Hagen, a great beat writer, Hall of Fame beat writer for the Philadelphia Daily News from when I was growing up. Bill Lyon, a great columnist for the Inquirer when I was a kid. Just so many great writers. John Lowe from the Detroit Free Press when I was just starting out really helped out. Buster Olney, as someone who helped guide me through the early days of the Times. And I could go on and on, but there's a lot of great writers out there today. And some of the longtime beat writers, the people who are out there grinding and bringing their fans closer to the teams. Derek Gould in St. Louis, and Pete Abraham in Boston, and Susan Slusser out in the Bay Area, and Mark Topkin down in Tampa, and just so many of these dedicated daily reporters. I did it for 12 years, and I know how tough that job is, but how rewarding it is when you really get to see how a team works, and how rewarding it is for you and for your readers. So yeah, I mean, I'm a student of baseball writers and baseball, in their place in the game. And you have another one up there, Dan Shaughnessy. I mean, he's the general columnist, obviously, but he's a Hall of Fame writer and a great friend. And so Dan's, I'll read everything Dan writes about anything. So yeah, a lot of great ones. I'm sure I missed some in that long answer, but Jason Stark, basically you can just answer it in 2 words as Jason Stark.
Still welcome to Starkville, if you will.
Yeah.
I guess we have enough time for a few general questions. One of the ones, I guess, is what advice would you give to young aspiring journalists that are looking to make it in the sports writing industry, and also part of that is you've written 2 books. What advice would you give to writing a book if you on sports, if you will?
Question was, I was still thinking about writers who I didn't.
Yeah.
So the question, what Mike DiGiovanna from the LA Times, by the way, another one. So the question was about writing books and advice about that, and also just advice to young journalists. Is that what it was?
Yeah, I guess we'll start with, I guess really the big one is a lot of us are trying to make it in the industry, and guess trying to get your foot in the door sometimes, and you feel like you're writing all the time, writing every day or whatever. What advice would you give to people who are younger, aspiring sports writers and sports journalists to make it?
Yeah, it's a reminder of how lucky I was to enter the job market in the late 90s compared to now. I think in some ways now, you have more outlets to write because the web is so wide, and because there's so many people who can give you that opportunity. But it really comes down to finding a way to get access to I think to the players and to the people, and then because that's how you can distinguish yourself from this vast sort of web of anybody can write, right? Anybody can write, but it's the people who I think who can get access to the the people who play the game, who can distinguish themselves. I don't know how to really navigate the getting a job, so to speak, because I'm lucky to have had the same employer since 2000. But I've always felt that if you are good and if you are driven to work hard, that those 2 things are rarer than you think. I remember going to college at Vanderbilt thinking that everybody was going to be as good and as driven as I was, and there were a lot of talented people there, but I had the drive and the talent, I guess, that I needed. And part of drive is knowing how much more you need to know, knowing how much better you can get. So it was taking advantage of every opportunity. It was making your own opportunities. Like I said, I started doing a baseball magazine when I was a teenager, and elbowed my way into the Phillies, got a press pass, showed that I could handle it, got more press passes, showed that I could handle that, and then developed a confidence and enough of a portfolio where I could build off it from there. You need to have someone who can speak on your behalf, somebody who can vouch for you to the people who do hiring. A lot of it's right place, right time, right situation, what employers are looking for. But yeah, and also in your writing, remembering that this sounds so cheesy, but try to say it in a not cheesy way, but there is only one you. So like, I think when I was starting out for just a little while, I was trying a little too much, like, it's almost 15, 16, whatever. It was trying too much to like sound like a sports writer, or sound like what I think a sports writer should sound. And it's really just trusting yourself that your, maybe not necessarily opinions, but your perspective and the way that you view things has to be an asset, because nobody else has. It's the one thing that you alone have, is your own perspective. Nobody else has your perspective. So trust it, use it, and don't try to be anyone else. You can take stuff from people, but you write enough, do enough writing, you will develop your own style. and stick with your own instincts on things. I don't know. That's a lot. There's a lot to unpack there, but you know, a lot of it's luck. Like I said, for me, coming in the '90s, there was a lot more opportunities than there are now, or it was much more linear. Maybe is what I'm trying to say. You know, I got my first job in Riverside, California, because we just followed the steps. Someone left Boston Globe to go to Sports Illustrated. Someone left this paper to go to Boston. Someone left that paper to go to that paper. Someone left, and that left the Riverside Press Enterprise covering the Angels open, and that's what I got. And it doesn't really work that way now, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I always think about, as starting out, like I started a few years ago, is this, you like want to be able to prove to teams that you could kick down the door and like overwhelm them, they'll be like, oh wow, you're really impressive. I think I guess we could end on this question, I guess a light note, if you will, is with the Hall of Fame, is got a comment. So I also want to ask, because I'm a little curious about this, is that everyone's of course a little fatigued about the Roger Clemens, Barry Bonds, Curt Schilling Hall of Fame ballot. They're on the ballot again. We don't know if they're going to get in. And it's very interesting because you're part of the chapter board, I think, for voting on the Hall of Fame, but I don't know if I think there's a New York Times rule.
Yeah, the New York Times doesn't allow us to vote. So
yeah. So I'm a little curious about you. Maybe you could talk about what, maybe is it a journalistic integrity thing, but like why the New York Times doesn't allow it, but also I guess the Hall of Fame vote is what do you think is going to happen with some of these players, if they get in or not, or what do you think, or what do you think is how do you think it's going to turn out, if you will?
Yeah, well, the Times policy is that they say we're supposed to report the news, not make the news, and Hall of Fame voters are newsmakers. So that's what they say. And I work there, so I have to follow that rule. Don't agree with it, but that's what I have to do. So Bonds, Clemens, and Schilling now have moved on to the era committee, the small committee vote. In the end, they did get the majority of votes from the writers. Schilling, in fact, won one of the elections, but he only got 70%, and you need 75. So getting the majority, Clemens, Bonds, and Schilling all did that. Doesn't matter because you need 75%. So that is an important thing to mention, because when people say the writers reject these guys, well, okay, at his peak, Schilling got 7 out of 10 writers. Didn't get 7.5 out of 10. He needed 7. Bonds and Clemens got in the 60% range. You need more. It's really, really hard to get in. And to answer that question, it all depends on who is on that contemporary era committee. There's only going to be 16 voters, I think. So it's going to just be up to who makes up that committee. Now, if it's more modern Hall of Famers, or maybe more younger executive media member types, maybe the steroid guys or whatever will have a better chance. But my sense is that most of the people who would likely be on that committee would be unlikely to vote to open the door for guys with strong steroid ties. I could be wrong. I think Bonds and Schilling should be in. I think they should have plaques. Bonds and Clemens, I mean, and I absolutely think Schilling should. That's him on the poster back there of Veteran Stadium throwing the last pitch in the of the '93 World Series Game 5. But I think only Schilling has, of those three, I think Schilling has the best chance, and maybe the only chance, for this committee, depending on who's on it and how they configure it.
Yeah,
I think Fred McGriff will get in, and I think he should get in. But it would be a little weird if like Fred McGriff was the only one who gets in this year. But I could see that happening. I mean, maybe in that room, you never know how these discussions go in that room. I'd love to be, I'd love to have a secret video camera in there and watch it, because, if they somehow decide that it's not going to be Clemens or Bonds, maybe some momentum shifts to Mattingly and Murphy or something like that. In addition to McGriff. So I don't know, it's going to be fascinating. And as far as the writer's ballot, Beltran's not going to get in on the first try, and there's nobody else close on the new ballot. So then you're looking at the same candidates who've been on it for a while, Scott Rowland and Todd Helton and Sheffield and Wagner and those guys, and a bunch of others. And I don't know if any of those guys make the jump up to 75. So it could be a very small class this year.
I think it wouldn't be. I mean, I think 2020 had also a small class. If not, nobody got in.
Nobody.
Nobody.
The pandemic saved us from that. So they didn't have a ceremony that year anyway. And then the next year they had, they grouped, they did the previous year and it was fine. That was the Jeter year, Jeter, Walker, and a couple, and Ted Simmons.
Yeah, I guess it's a little random if you especially since Jeter and Rivera were back-to-back years, gave people like you had people on the ballot for that, and David Ortiz was on the ballot. It's like, I guess the timing's everything, and when it comes to that.
Yeah, and Ortiz, this was a fun year because you had the two old twins there, and Cott and Oliva and David Ortiz, and it was a fun day in Cooperstown. It's always fun. And when McGriff gets in, as I suspect he will, he deserves it. He was a blind spot for the writers. He kind of got caught in that trap of a lot of worthy candidates, plus some steroid guys who always got support, and people wanted to vote for McGriff, but he wasn't in their top 10, and you're limited to 10. So I would hope that the contemporary era committee rights that wrong, because McGriff's a Hall of Famer for me.
Yeah. So I wouldn't be. I mean, I would hope he gets in as well. But I guess that's all the time we have. We've gone over our hour. This was great. Tyler, thank you for doing this, because talking about the book. If anyone hasn't bought the Grandest Stage, highly recommend getting it. One of my favorite baseball books of all time. I mean, I've read like a few baseball books, so like it's right up there. Is one of the best. Highly recommend it, and I guess thank you for doing this. Really nice.
All right, well, great, Mike. Thanks for reaching out, and good to talk to you. And I'm glad you like the book. Really, really appreciate that. So, have a good night. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.